Imagine leading your people across a continent to escape the influence of powerful kin, only to find yourself neighbors with an even greater threat. This was the reality for the Elven-kings Oropher and his son Thranduil. They didn't just live in Greenwood, they fought for it, moving their entire realm 3 separate times just to survive the encroaching darkness. Hi guys, my name is Jason Hamilton. I write fantasy for a living, and on this channel we explore the kind of world building from my favorite franchises that makes it all feel so real. Today we're telling the story of the elves of the woodland realm and their ancient home, the great forest that would one day be known as Mirkwood. In the beginning, it wasn't a place of fear. It was Greenwood the Great, the vastest forest in northern Middle-earth, stretching hundreds of miles in every direction. The north was dominated by mighty oaks, while in the lands that the elves favored, elegant beech trees grew. Its early inhabitants were the Sylvan Elves, or Wood Elves, and they were descendants of the Teleri, a clan who abandoned the Great Migration to the Undying Lands, choosing instead the wild forests of Middle-earth. They lived a simple life, deeply connected to the woods that they called home. This changed near the start of the Second Age. After a cataclysmic war destroyed the elven lands in the west, a Sindarin lord named Oropher led a small group of refugees east. He had seen his own kingdom of Doriath fall, and he wanted no part of the politics of the powerful Noldorin, elves who now held sway. He was seeking a return to a simpler elven life, one he believed the Sylvan elves still lived. Oropher and his followers were welcomed, and they quickly assimilated, even adopting the Sylvan language. His son Thranduil had a son of his own who would eventually be given a Sylvan name, Legolas, and in return the Wood Elves, recognizing Oropher's wisdom, made him their king. He established the woodland realm, first setting up his capital on a high, treeless hill in the south of the forest called Amanlanc, the Naked Hill. But this peace would be short-lived, as Oropher found himself trading one kind of inconvenient neighbor with another. Oropher hadn't crossed a continent just to be bothered by new powers. To his west across the Great River, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm were growing mighty and rich, and their influence was spreading. Even more irritating to the king were his elven neighbors in Lothlorien, led by Celeborn and the powerful Noldoran lady Galadriel. Oropher resented their intrusion into what he considered the Sylvan's domain, so he moved. He led his people north, away from the dwarves and away from Lorien, seeking isolation. By the end of the Second Age, they had settled in the highlands of the northeast, but no amount of distance could shield them from the true threat growing in the land of Mordor. Oropher was wise enough to know that the Dark Lord Sauron would never leave them in peace. Though his people were hardy, they were ill-equipped for open war, armed mostly for forest skirmishes. Worse, Oropher's pride and historical distrust of the Noldor meant he refused to place his army under the command of the High King Gil-galad. The decision was fatal. At the great battle before the gates of Mordor, Oropher led a reckless and premature charge. He and the best of his warriors were cut down. His son Thranduil, now king, led a shattered army home. Less than a third of the elves who had marched to war returned to Greenwood. The woodland realm was safe for now, but it had paid a terrible price, a loss from which it would never fully recover. For 1,000 years, Thranduil ruled over a quiet, diminished kingdom. Then around the year 1000 of the Third Age, a shadow fell. A dark power took root in the southern part of the forest, building a fortress on the very same hill that had been Oropher's first capital, Amanlanc. The hill was renamed Dol Guldur, the Hill of Sorcery, and the sorcerer who dwelt there was known only as the Necromancer. Of course, this was Sauron. Though his body was destroyed in the war, his spirit endured. He chose this spot deliberately. It was near the Gladden Fields, the place where Isildur had lost the One Ring. From Dol Guldur, he could search for his lost weapon while his evil bled into the surrounding woods. Greenwood the Great was no more. The forest grew dark and twisted. Its name changed to Tar Nufuin, but it became known to most by its common name, Mirkwood. The trees themselves seemed to conspire against travelers, their branches rotting and their leaves withering. Giant spiders, foul descendants of an ancient evil, spun webs in the gloom. The animals became strange and inedible. Facing this growing corruption, Thranduil knew he had to move his people once more, so he retreated to the far northeastern corner of the forest, and with dwarvish help he built a massive fortified hall underground, a fortress inspired by the ancient elven city of Menegroth. From this stronghold, he and his people would hold the line against the darkness for the rest of the age. Now, on this channel, I don't run sponsors, affiliates, and I try to keep mid-rolls ads out of the videos, and this whole channel is self-funded. I do have one thing I'd love for you to check out, though, and that's my fantasy all-access library. It's where you can get every fantasy book that my team and I have written, all set in a huge shared universe where all of Earth's mythologies are real. So it's how I keep the lights on here. So if that sounds cool, there's a link in the description. The wise of Middle-earth grew concerned about the Necromancer. In 2463, Galadriel formed the White Council to unite the powerful against the Shadow. She wanted Gandalf to lead it, but he refused, and the position went to Saruman the White. This would prove to be a rather disastrous choice. Gandalf, acting alone, snuck into Dol Guldur in 2063. He didn't find out who the Necromancer was, but his presence was enough to make Sauron flee, beginning a 400-year period period of watchful peace. But Sauron returned, and in 2850 Gandalf went back. This time he discovered the horrifying truth that the Necromancer was Sauron himself, and he was actively hunting for the One Ring. Gandalf rushed to the White Council, urging an immediate attack while Sauron was still rebuilding his strength. But Saruman overruled him. The White Wizard had secretly begun to desire the ring for himself, and his plan was devious. Let Sauron do the hard work of searching for the ring, and once it was found, Saruman would take it for himself. He obstructed any action against Dol Guldur for 90 years. Finally, in 2941, the same year as the events of The Hobbit, Saruman learned Sauron was searching the Gladden Fields alarmingly close to where the ring was lost. Fearing his rival would find it first, Saruman finally agreed to attack. The White Council drove Sauron from Dol Guldur, but it was too little too late. Sauron had already made his plans. He simply feigned a retreat and fled to Mordor, where his true fortress, Barad-dûr. The attack didn't defeat him, it just rushed him along to his preferred destination. Within a decade, he sent 3 of the Nazgûl, led by Khamûl the Easterling, to reoccupy Dol Guldur. The golden opportunity to strike a decisive blow had been squandered by Saruman's greed. That same year, a small company led by a dwarf named Thorin Oakenshield had to cross Mirkwood on a quest to reclaim their home from a dragon. Gandalf guided them to the edge, but left them to face the forest alone as he was busy with the attack on Dol Guldur. Their journey was a catalogue of Mirkwood's perils. The dwarf bomber fell into the enchanted river and was plunged into a magical sleep, forcing his companions to carry him. Frightened and starving, they strayed from the path and were immediately set upon by giant spiders. They were saved by their burglar, a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, who used his newfound courage and a magic ring to fight off the spiders and free the dwarves. But no sooner were they free than they were captured by Thranduil's wood elves. The Elven King was deeply suspicious of a band of dwarves wandering his realm. When Thorin refused to state his purpose, something about dwarves and treasures tends to make them secretive, Thranduil had them all thrown in his dungeon. Once again, it was Bilbo who saved them. Using his ring to remain invisible, he explored the Elven King's halls until he found a way out, the great trap door where empty wine barrels were dropped into the forest river to be sent downstream to Lake Town. He freed the dwarves, packed them up into barrels, and orchestrated a rather damp and undignified escape. They had survived Mirkwood, but just barely. During the War of the Ring, the main narrative followed Frodo's quest to Mordor, but Mirkwood and the lands around it became a bloody northern front. Sauron's strategy was to attack on all fronts at once. He set a massive army of Easterlings to attack the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain and the men of Dale. In a desperate battle, both King Brand of Dale and the dwarven King Dane, Ironfoot, were killed. The survivors were besieged inside the mountain and would have been wiped out if Sauron hadn't been defeated in the south. At the same time, forces of Dol Guldur launched a full-scale assault on Thranduil's realm. A great battle was fought under the trees so fierce, large parts of the forest were burned. Thranduil's elves were masters of forest warfare, and using their underground fortress as a base, they fought off the assault and were ultimately victorious. This struggle went largely unseen by the wider world, but it was vital. Had Thranduil or the dwarves of Erebor fallen, Sauron's northern army would have been free to sweep south, and then the outcome of the war could have been very different. The forest also played a small but crucial role in the quest. After Aragorn captured Gollum, he brought the wretched creature to Thranduil for safekeeping, but during an orc raid, Gollum escaped. Thranduil sent his son Legolas to Rivendell to deliver the bad news. This errand is what led Legolas to attend the Council of Elrond and ultimately join the Fellowship of the Ring. Now, after Sauron was finally destroyed, the shadow lifted from Mirkwood almost instantly. Celeborn and Galadriel led an army out of Lorien and marched on Dol Guldur. Galadriel, wielding the power of her elven ring, threw down its walls and cleansed the fortress of its evil forever. A few days later, on April 6th, Thranduil and Celeborn met in the heart of the forest. The long, dark chapter was over, and they gave the forest a new name, Erin Lascalain, the Wood of Green Leaves. They divided the restored land. Celeborn took the southern portion, naming it East Lorien. Thranduil's kingdom remained in the north, and the wide central part of the forest was given to the woodmen and the Beorlings, who had been their allies for so long. Legolas would eventually leave his father's kingdom to lead a group of elves to the southern lands of Ithilien, making it fair again. As for Thranduil, he likely remained in his woodland halls, the steadfast king who had guarded his people through centuries of darkness, ruling in the Greenwood until the time of the elves in Middle-earth finally came to an end. If you enjoyed this delve into the lore, you'll probably enjoy the worlds I build in my own books. I invite you to enjoy the Fantasy All Access Library. It's a community my team and I have built on a platform called School. When you join, you can get access to my entire library of ebooks and audiobooks that have been produced so far, plus at least one new novel every month. We also do weekly live calls where we talk fantasy, writing, world building, and it's the best way to support the channel and get a ton of great fantasy content in return. So go check that out, and I'll see you in the next video.